Now, have you all got that committed to memory? There'll be a little test at the end of this. Ah, well, I'm sure Jenny can arrange for that. Okay, now, just quickly, for anyone that missed the detail of Will Stephen's presentation yesterday, just a reminder that the climate change story has always been worrying, but just in the last half-decade, it's become much more worrying. The recent science, and a lot of it that has emerged since the report of the IPCC, the fourth assessment report, has shown us that on these critical measures of atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration, average Earth surface temperature, sea level rise, if you could see the detail there, the solid lines are showing us for each of those that we're already tracking above the dotted lines, which represent the family of projections that were made by different models for different scenarios of future human behaviour and emissions. So that the world around us is changing more rapidly than we would have predicted just 5 or 10 years ago. And you'll see this paper was published last year, early last year in fact. It's 12 months old, and already some of the other science that's coming to light is showing us that's, well, for example, that second to last point I've listed there, the ice melt. We can see that in this next slide, which you'll recall Will Stephen showed us yesterday. That just in the last 5 years, the actual rate of melting of the Arctic sea ice has taken that black trajectory. That's indicated the loss of sea ice is now proceeding much more rapidly than was projected at the beginning of this decade. So there are lots of surprises out there. The feedbacks are apparently starting to kick in, and climate change is becoming a more worrying prospect for all of us. The UN Development Programme produced this annual report late last year, the Human Development Report, and they focused on climate change, and they're basically saying that this is really a threat to plans for human development in lower income countries around the world. And you can see there in the red rectangle the argument that was made that the world is drifting towards a tipping point that could lock the world's poorest countries and their poorest citizens in a downward spiral, leaving hundreds of millions facing malnutrition, water scarcity, ecological threats, and a loss of livelihoods. Now, I suppose the positive signal here is that the issue of climate change is now pervading the thoughts, the concerns, and the work of many other sectors, many other United Nations agencies. So this hopefully signals that we're going to get a broader based and more coordinated collective response to this great contemporary issue. This is a rather dramatic example that also refers to the fundamental importance of environmental conditions and the maintenance of ecological systems with respect to stability in human societies. Now, this report produced by the UN Environment Programme last year, called the Sudan Post-Conflict Environmental Assessment, drew the conclusion, which I'll show you in the next slide, that a fundamental precipitating influence on the conflict in Darfur and indeed in previously in the south of Sudan had been to do with the diminishing supplies of natural resources, reflecting changing environmental, and in the case of Darfur particularly, the changing climatic conditions, the long-term drying trend that climate scientists are beginning to recognize as a consequence in mid-latitudes, north and south particularly, a consequence of global warming. And you'll see the conclusion then in the executive summary here that the problem in northern Darfur can be considered a tragic example of the social breakdown that can result from ecological collapse. A situation in which you had traditional pastoralists and nomadic farmers and herders in increasing conflict for diminishing vegetation, for resources. So it's a dramatic example, but a reminder then of just how pervasive a change in climatic conditions will be with respect to all of those things that would be important in the achievement of the MDGs. The next two slides remind us again of the the point that our Prime Minister, our now Prime Minister, made 12 months ago, that global climate change is the great moral issue of the age. And of course, the most important moral dimension really is this one, that on the one hand we've got this very disparate map in terms of who is and who has been emitting greenhouse gases in the world, and you can see where most of the action has been. And of course the next map shows us the best recent estimate via the World Health Organization earlier this decade, work that I was involved in estimating the distribution of premature death and disabling disease around the world. And you can see where the brunt of the impacts is estimated to occur, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. Bottom left, you can see the categories of health outcomes that were included in this analysis, and it was only part of the list that we could have included had we actually had more complete information. We still need to do a lot more rapid research to understand the full range of health consequences. Okay, now this one's another of those roadmaps. I don't want to dwell on this, but I just want to make the point that climate change is part of a larger family of large-scale environmental changes, and that the pathways via which human health is affected are many and diverse. In the top, the blue ones are relatively easy to understand as direct impacts, but the purple ones, infectious disease risks, effects on food yields and human nutrition and health, are affected by a multiplicity of environmental change, climate change pathways, often interacting with one another. I don't have time to talk about the very interesting infectious disease area, and I thought I would just pick out now and work through the story on effects on food yields and therefore human nutrition and human malnutrition, quite central to the MDGs. This estimation that was done, that I mentioned a moment ago, by WHO, of the current, shown in green, and the future burdens of disease attributable to current and modelled future climate change, indicate, as you can see in the bottom tier, that malnutrition was accorded the greatest contribution to this burden of disease around the world. So it's an important item. And of course it's occurring against a background of other things going on. Just in this month we've heard from the World Food Programme that there's an apparent incipient crisis. They have insufficient money now to stave off global malnutrition this year, in their judgment, due to the dramatic rise in world food and commodity prices, and that of course includes oil. But you see then that extraordinary 40% increase in world food prices in 2007, quite unprecedented, and grain stocks are falling in the world. The head of the programme describes this as being attributable to a perfect storm of factors, including the increasing demand for animal feed, as China, India and other parts of the world eat more and more meat, and more of the cereal grains goes into that part of the food production chain. Biofuels production, alienating productive food-producing land, and climate change. She picked out these three factors as critical. There's the graph of the food price index for 2007, rocketing up.